My husband brought his mistress home on a Tuesday. He walked through the front door at 10 past 9 with a woman half his age on his arm and a manila envelope in his fist. He threw the divorce papers onto the kitchen table, the same oak table I had stripped and sanded and refinished by hand 3 summers ago, and told me to sign everything and be out of the house by midnight. Rebecca stepped in behind him, dragging a limited edition Birkin bag across the threshold like a flag being planted. She ran one lacquered fingertip along the grain of the oak and wrinkled her nose. "What cheap, filthy wood," she said, not even glancing in my direction. "Have someone tear this out tomorrow, darling." Arthur did not correct her. The only sound in the room was the rain hammering the gutters I had cleaned myself last weekend. I did not cry. I picked up the envelope, folded the papers once along the crease, and slid them into my coat pocket. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. Arthur stood there blinking because he had expected screaming, sobbing, the kind of scene that would have justified calling the police. Instead, he got quiet compliance, and something about that silence made Rebecca shift her weight on those 4-inch heels. Arthur recovered quickly. He puffed out his chest and reminded me that Rebecca's father owned half the commercial real estate in Illinois, and that I should be smart about this because I did not have the resources to fight a family like hers. His mother, Margaret, had been coaching him. I could hear her words in his mouth like an echo. He told me I was a mid-level accountant with a mid-level life, and that I should be grateful he had kept me around this long. Rebecca folded her arms and looked at me the way you look at a stain on a countertop, something to be wiped away before the new furniture arrives. I zipped my suitcase. One bag. 25 years of marriage, and it fit in one bag because most of what mattered in that house was built by my hands, not bought with my name. I stepped onto the porch, and the rain hit my face like a slap. Behind me, Rebecca was already rearranging my living room. Arthur was pouring my wine into her glass. Neither of them had ever known that the woman walking into the storm was the sole heir to Sterling Industries, a $5 billion industrial conglomerate headquartered 40 minutes east on Lakeshore Drive. That house was the cheapest property I had ever slept in. But the pen scratching across those divorce papers, that thin, cold sound under the thunder, I want you to remember it. It comes back later. And when it does, it means something entirely different. Before we continue, if you believe every woman deserves to know her own worth, please consider subscribing. It is free, and it helps stories like this reach more women who need to hear them. To understand that night, you need to understand the 25 years before it. You need to know who I was before I became Arthur's wife and what I gave up to become her. So, let me take you back. I grew up on the top floor of a limestone building overlooking Lake Michigan. My father, William Sterling, built his empire from nothing 90-hour weeks in a machine shop in Gary, Indiana, Greece, under his fingernails, eating cold sandwiches over a lathe. By the time I was born, he had turned that shop into Sterling Industries, a conglomerate spanning precision manufacturing, defense contracts, and industrial automation. $5 billion. But money brought a specific kind of loneliness. Every woman who entered his life wanted the name, the houses, the accounts. He married twice after my mother died. Both marriages ended with lawyers, forensic auditors, and women who vanished the moment the prenuptial agreements held. I watched that cycle from the hallway of a penthouse that felt like a museum, and I made myself a promise I would find love that had nothing to do with a last name. So at 25, I buried the Sterling identity, moved to the west suburbs, rented a one-bedroom apartment with a window that did not close all the way and a radiator that clanked every morning at 5. I took a job as a staff accountant at a small firm in Naperville and learned to live on $42,000 a year, which was a kind of freedom I had never tasted, the freedom of knowing that everything on my plate I had earned with my own hands. I met Arthur at a neighborhood barbecue that July. He was 27, a junior sales associate at a commercial real estate office, and he had the kind of smile that made you believe things would work out. He brought me daisies on our second date because he could not afford roses. I thought that was more beautiful than any arrangement money could buy. We married within a year. Olivia was born 3 years later, 7 pounds, 2 ounces, screaming like she already had opinions about the world. Holding her in the delivery room watching Arthur's eyes fill with tears as he touched her tiny fingers. I thought this is why I gave it all up. This is what real wealth looks like. For 25 years, I played the role. I clipped coupons from the Sunday newspaper and organized them in an accordion folder by category. I cooked beef stew every Wednesday because it was Arthur's favorite, the rich peppery smell filling the kitchen by 6 in the evening, fogging the windows, settling into the curtains until the whole house smelled like patience. I balanced our household budget on a spreadsheet I updated every Sunday night while Arthur watched football, and I made that budget sing $200 a month into the mortgage principal, $150 into Olivia's college fund, $75 into the emergency reserve. I ironed Arthur's shirts with the collar crease exactly the way his mother demanded. I drove Olivia to soccer practice and piano lessons and orthodontist appointments 3 towns over and sat in parking lots reading library books because a second car was not in the budget until year 12. When Olivia's school held a parent gala, I sewed my own dress from clearance fabric because the $200 a store-bought dress would have cost was exactly 1 extra mortgage payment. Arthur wore a new blazer that night. He always had new blazers. I learned to fix leaky faucets from YouTube tutorials because a plumber charged $120 an hour. I taught myself basic electrical work when the kitchen outlet died because calling an electrician would have meant canceling Olivia's summer camp deposit. Every year at Christmas, I bought myself one small thing, a candle, a scarf, a used paperback, and told myself it was enough. And it was enough. Or I told myself it was. His mother, Margaret, set the tone from the very first Thanksgiving. She walked into our home, surveyed the secondhand dining table, the IKEA bookshelves, the kitchen where I had hand-sewn the curtains from clearance fabric, and said, "Well, this is certainly cozy." She said cozy the way a surgeon says interesting while studying a scan he wishes he did not have to explain. For 25 years, she called me the bookkeeper, as if my name was too much effort to remember. She reminded Arthur at every holiday that he could have married a Prescott or a Harrington old money Chicago families whose daughters had trust funds and country club memberships. She gave Olivia designer clothes and took her to restaurants I could not afford, then returned our daughter to us smelling like Chanel and looking at our house with new critical eyes. I watched my daughter slowly absorb the lesson Margaret was teaching her, that worth was measured in labels and square footage. That hurt more than anything Margaret ever said to me directly. The early signs with Arthur were small enough to dismiss. Around year 18, he started caring about brands. He wanted a BMW instead of our paid-off Honda. He began dropping names into conversation, Armani Rolex, Patek Philippe, the way a student crams vocabulary before an exam. He criticized my clothes. "You dress like a librarian, Emma." He criticized my cooking. "Can we eat something that does not come from a slow cooker?" He criticized the house. "Every time I bring someone from the office over, I am embarrassed." I told myself this was a midlife adjustment. Men his age go through phases. The stew was still warm on the stove. Olivia was finishing her junior year at Northwestern. The mortgage was nearly paid off. Things were fine. At dinner one night, Arthur looked across the table at me and said, with the patient tone of a man explaining something obvious to a child, "You know what your problem is? Emma, you have no vision. You are content with ordinary." He said it while eating the pot roast I had spent 3 hours preparing at the table I had refinished in the house I had kept running for a quarter of a century. I smiled and asked if he wanted more bread. But here is what I know now that I did not know. Then in the months I was cutting coupons for laundry detergent, Arthur was spending $800 a week on dinners I was never invited to. In the years I was choosing store-brand coffee so we could pay down the principal faster, he was quoting watch prices to women who would never know the value of a dollar earned by hand. 25 years of me shrinking myself to fit inside his budget. I wonder how many Chanel bags that budget bought for someone else. That thought came later. At the time, I only noticed the stew going cold on nights he did not come home. The cracks started showing about 8 months before the night of the storm, and they did not look like lipstick on a collar. They looked like paperwork. A letter from the bank arrived on a Saturday morning. Arthur snatched it off the counter before I could read more than the header, but the words "second mortgage" burned into my eyes like a camera flash. He laughed it off. Junk mail, he said. A system error. The bank had been sending these to half the neighborhood. His voice was easy practiced, and I wanted to believe him because the alternative meant questioning 24 years of shared history. I told myself it was nothing. Then the watches appeared. An Omega Seamaster on a Tuesday. A Tag Heuer the following month. He told me they were high-quality replicas he wore to impress clients, Class A fakes Emma. Everyone in sales does it. You would not understand. The accountant in me did the math anyway. Class A fakes cost $200 to $300. The real versions cost $8,000 and up. The weight on his wrist looked like $8,000. But I told myself I was overthinking it. I told myself not every problem required a forensic audit. I told myself to trust my husband. Martha noticed what I was trying not to see. Martha Chen, my best friend, since before the wedding, a risk analyst at a downtown investment bank, and the only person on earth who knew my real name. She sat across from me at brunch one Sunday, set down her coffee and said, "M, there is a pattern of irregular withdrawals from your joint account. Large round numbers. Cash. No paper trail after the withdrawal window. That is textbook asset concealment. I have seen this pattern 100 times in fraud cases." I told her she was overanalyzing. I told her Arthur was difficult, but not dishonest. I told her that 25 years of marriage earned a man the benefit of the doubt. Martha looked at me the way a doctor looks at an X-ray. She wishes she did not have to explain. She did not argue. She just said, "When you are ready to see it, call me." I was not ready. Not that week. Not the week after. I clung to excuses the way a drowning person clings to a piece of wood that is already going under. I noticed Arthur had started password protecting his phone. I told myself everyone values their privacy. I noticed his gym bag smelled like a cologne he did not own. I told myself gyms have communal spray bottles. I noticed he had stopped touching me, not in the angry way, but in the absent way, the way you stop watering a plant you have already decided to throw out. I told myself we were just in a phase. Every marriage has phases. One evening while Arthur was in the shower, I sat down at his laptop. The password was the same one he had used for 8 years our wedding anniversary, which now felt like a cruel joke. The browser opened to a credit card portal. The balance glowed on the screen. $80,000. $80,000 on a card I had never seen, linked to our home address under both our names. My stomach folded in on itself. My fingers went cold on the keyboard. I could hear the shower still running. Maybe 3 minutes left. I could have opened the statements. I could have followed the charges, the restaurants, the hotels, the jewelry stores. I could have seen exactly where the money went and whose neck it was hanging from. Instead, I closed the laptop, pressed my palms flat against the desk until they stopped shaking, told myself it was a corporate card, told myself there was an explanation, told myself that this was not the kind of marriage where the wife snoops through the husband's finances at night. The laptop fan kept whirring in the dark after I walked away. A small mechanical hum, the sound of secrets running hot behind a screen. I went to bed. Arthur came out of the shower humming a song I did not recognize and got in beside me and fell asleep in 3 minutes. I lay there in the dark, listening to him breathe and counting 25 years times 365 nights. That was 9,125 nights I had slept next to this man. How many of those nights had been real? I told myself not to ask that question. But the truth does not wait until you are ready. It just shows up. Then Arthur made a mistake. In the final weeks, his arrogance outpaced his caution. He booked a weekend trip to Scottsdale and told me it was a sales conference, but the hotel confirmation email he forgot to delete listed a suite for 2 under the name Mr. and Mrs. Calloway. His real name was Whitfield. I stared at that email for a very long time. Calloway, a name he had invented for a life he was living without me. The excuses were gone. The explanations were empty. And then the night of the storm arrived, and Arthur threw the divorce papers on my oak table, and there was nothing left to tell myself at all. The rain soaked through my coat before I reached the car. I sat behind the wheel in the driveway for 2 minutes, watching the house through the windshield. The lights were on in the living room. Rebecca's silhouette moved past the window. She was already rearranging the furniture. She was already home. I drove to a gas station off Route 83, parked under the fluorescent overhang where the light buzzed and flickered against the rain. Opened my laptop on the passenger seat and logged into the federal credit monitoring system using my social security number, a system I had used 1,000 times for audit clients, but never once for myself. What I found made the affair feel like a footnote. Our house, the 3-bedroom Cape Cod, that I had spent 25 years paying down, painting, repairing, pouring every spare dollar into, had been remortgaged. Arthur had taken out a second lien for $400,000 in cash. The application was filed 14 months ago. The documents bore my signature, except it was not my signature. I signed my name with a slight upward slant on the final letter, a habit from my father's penmanship drills when I was a girl. The signature on the mortgage application slanted downward at 15 degrees. That was Arthur's hand. He had traced my name, practiced it probably on scrap paper at his desk, and used it to forge a federal lending document. He had extracted $400,000 from the home I had bled to build and funneled the money into a life I was never meant to know about. I scrolled through the withdrawal records. The first large transfer, $50,000, was dated 6 days after our 24th wedding anniversary. I had baked him a lemon cake that night from scratch, the way my mother had taught me before she died. He had kissed me and said I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. He held my face in both hands when he said it. 6 days later, he wired $50,000 of our stolen equity to a jewelry store on Magnificent Mile. This was not infidelity. This was mortgage fraud. Under federal law, this was a crime punishable by decades in prison, and it had been planned while the frosting was still drying on his birthday cake. The blue light of the laptop screen washed across my face in that empty parking lot. Rain streaked the windshield in long, crooked lines. I sat there feeling something unfamiliar. Not sadness, not rage, but a cold spreading numbness that started in my chest and moved outward until even my fingertips went still. Tears had been running down my face, and I had not noticed when they stopped. They stopped because a different part of me was waking up. The forensic part. The part that had spent 25 years reading audit reports and tracing irregular cash flows and identifying the line items that did not belong. That part looked at the forged signature on my screen and did not see heartbreak. It saw Exhibit A. I picked up my phone, scrolled to a number I had not dialed for help in 25 years. It rang twice. My father's voice came through the line, deep, unhurried, the voice of a man who had built a $5 billion empire by never wasting a syllable. Emma. He never said hello, just my name. I said 6 words. Dad, I need your lawyers. Tonight. There was a pause, 2 seconds, maybe 3, and then he said, "They will be ready when you arrive." The next morning I drove back to the house. Arthur was in the kitchen eating cereal. I made his coffee, 2 sugars splash of cream, set it on the table, and asked about his day. He kissed my forehead on his way out the door and said he would be late again. He did not notice the suitcase was gone from the closet. He did not notice that the woman pouring his coffee had already called the most powerful law firm in the state. 48 hours later, I sat in a glass-walled conference room on the 60th floor of Sterling Tower in downtown Chicago. Below me, Lake Michigan stretched out flat and iron gray under a winter sky. Across the table sat 3 forensic accountants, 2 corporate attorneys, a retired FBI financial crimes specialist named Hector Morales, whom my father kept on retainer, and Martha, who had taken emergency leave from her firm the hour I called. My father stood at the window with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the city the way a general surveys terrain before giving orders. I had brought everything. The credit monitoring printouts, the forged mortgage documents downloaded and time-stamped, my own signature samples from 15 years of tax filings for comparison. I had spent the previous night running a preliminary trace on the $400,000, following the wire transfers through 2 intermediary accounts before the trail went cold at a series of cash withdrawals. I laid it all out on the conference table, not as a grieving wife asking for help, but as a forensic accountant presenting an audit finding. The room went quiet. Catherine Park, the lead attorney, leaned forward and spoke carefully. Under 18 United States Code, Section 1014, knowingly making a false statement on a mortgage application to a federally insured institution is a felony carrying up to 30 years in prison. The electronic transfer of those funds adds wire fraud under Section 1343. Emma, your husband did not just cheat on you. He committed a federal crime, and the evidence you have assembled would be sufficient to open a bureau investigation today. My father turned from the window. What do you need from us? Catherine needed time documentation and absolute discretion. She got all three. Then came the second revelation, and this one was almost funny. While Arthur was busy moving Rebecca's wardrobe into my closet, the investigation team ran a full financial background on Rebecca's family. The results arrived in a 40-page report that Hector Morales presented with the driest delivery I had ever witnessed. Rebecca's father, Gerald Brennan, did not own half the commercial real estate in Illinois. He owned 5 mid-range furniture showrooms, imported Italian designs, high overhead, razor-thin margins, currently drowning under $15 million of non-performing loans spread across 3 regional banks. The Brennan family maintained their lifestyle the way a sinking ship maintains altitude, revolving credit lines, max store cards, and the desperate hope that something would change before the water reached the deck. Hector turned a page. Gerald Brennan had quietly pushed his daughter toward wealthy-looking men, the way a failing company pushes inventory before a bankruptcy filing. Rebecca had targeted Arthur because he looked rich, the watches, the suits, the expensive dinners. Arthur had targeted Rebecca because she looked connected. The designer bags, the name-dropping, the father, who supposedly owned half the state. 2 grifters circling each other in a ballroom, each convinced the other was the mark. Ms. Sterling. Hector said, "Your husband used money from a forged mortgage to buy his mistress luxury goods. His mistress used money from predatory credit lines to buy him status accessories. They have been performing wealth for each other using debt fraud and your home equity as the stage. It is the most expensive amateur theater production I have reviewed in 30 years of financial investigation." Martha laughed one sharp, involuntary bark that echoed off the glass walls. I did not laugh, but something shifted in my chest, the kind of dark, exhausted humor that only surfaces after you have been through the worst of it. 2 frauds, 2 performances. And I had been the only real person in the triangle, the one who actually earned her money, actually cooked the dinners, actually loved her husband. The irony was almost elegant in its cruelty. The deeper investigation took 3 weeks of careful, invisible work. I did much of it myself, returning to the house every other evening, cooking dinner, smiling, asking about Arthur's day, while my mind cataloged every visible detail. The new cashmere throw on the couch. The restaurant receipt from Rush Street crumpled in his jacket. A FedEx tracking confirmation for jewelry I was not supposed to know about. Every observation went into a secured spreadsheet on a laptop Martha kept at her apartment. I was living 2 lives, and the discipline required to keep them separate made the muscles in my jaw ache from clenching. One Thursday, I nearly lost everything. Arthur had gone upstairs to shower, and I was photographing his latest credit card statement, $14,000, in charges at hotels, boutiques, a spa in Scottsdale, when the water shut off. Too early. He usually took 12 minutes. I was at minute 8. My hands went cold. I closed the folder, positioned it at the exact angle I had memorized 15 degrees from the edge of the desk measured on my first visit, and was sliding into the kitchen chair when his footstep hit the top stair. "Emma," he called down. "What are you doing?" "Looking up a chicken marsala recipe," I said, holding up my phone with a cooking page I had opened as cover 3 seconds earlier. He appeared in the doorway in a towel dripping and studied me for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. "You never cook from recipes," he said. "Trying something new?" I answered and smiled until he grunted and went back upstairs. I sat in that chair for 4 full minutes afterward, listening to my heartbeat downshift from a sprint to a walk. I looked at my father during the next briefing. He was already reaching for the phone. Within 72 hours, Sterling Industries quietly acquired the entirety of Gerald Brennan's $15 million debt portfolio from the three banks. My father did not do this out of cruelty. He did it because, in his world, owning someone's debt meant owning the conversation. I understood the strategy. I had grown up watching it. But I also insisted on a condition no action would be taken against the Brennan business until the timing served the legal case, not personal revenge. Meanwhile, Catherine's team prepared a formal criminal referral to the FBI's Chicago field office for mortgage fraud under Section 1014, supported by wire fraud charges under Section 1343, since Arthur had transferred the stolen funds electronically through interstate banking systems. The FBI accepted the case within a week. A federal magistrate judge reviewed the evidence, my forensic analysis, the signature comparison, the wire transfer records, and signed an arrest warrant. The machinery of federal justice, once engaged, does not negotiate or hesitate. It simply proceeds. Arthur, oblivious, sent me a photograph, a gold-embossed engagement party invitation. His and Rebecca's names in calligraphy. A ballroom at the Drake Hotel. 300 guests. He wrote underneath, "Just so you know what you missed out on." His mother, Margaret, called the same afternoon. Her voice was warm, the way a knife is warm after being held too long. "I always said Arthur deserved better, dear. Now he has it. You should see the ring 3 carats. I helped him choose it. Rebecca's family is flying in from their lake house. It will be the wedding of the year." She paused, waiting for the sound of crying. I said thank you for the update, and hung up. 2 days later, I received my own invitation. Rebecca had added my name to the guest list, not from courtesy, but from spite. She wanted me there to see what she believed she had won. I held the card up to the light. Gold ink, heavy stock, paid for with money borrowed against a future that did not exist. I RSVP'd yes. Then I pressed my navy blue dress, a bespoke piece, from a tailor in Milan I had visited once years ago, on the only trip I had ever taken with my father's money. No logo, no visible label, just cut fabric and construction that no credit card can imitate. Martha chose a charcoal sheath dress with pearl buttons. We stood side by side in front of the mirror and said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Everything that needed saying was inside a manila folder on my desk. That folder held the final inventory. 1 federal arrest warrant signed by a magistrate judge in the Northern District of Illinois. 1 certified forensic signature analysis. 1 portfolio of $15 million in acquired debt transfer complete. 2 FBI special agents briefed and stationed. And 1 gold-embossed engagement party invitation, RSVP confirmed. I picked up the folder. It was heavier than paper had any right to be 25 years of silence compressed into evidence. Arthur had rented the largest ballroom at the Drake Hotel. Crystal chandeliers threw light across 300 guests in evening wear. A string quartet played Vivaldi. Champagne towers caught the glow. Ice sculptures melted slowly at the center of tables laden with imported cheeses and cured meats that cost more than our monthly grocery budget had been for 2 decades. Arthur stood at the center of it all, in a rented tuxedo, one arm around Rebecca, who wore a white gown with a rhinestone tiara that caught the light every time she turned her head. Margaret sat at the head table in a silk dress, her chin lifted, her posture radiating the particular kind of pride that comes from believing your child has finally become the person you always wanted them to be. The room smelled of lilies and expensive cologne and the specific kind of confidence that grows in the absence of truth. I arrived at 7:15. Martha walked beside me. We did not rush. The doorman checked our names, paused, and waved us through. Heads turned. A few of Arthur's colleagues whispered. He spotted me from across the room, and his smile flickered for 1/2 second before he reset it. Rebecca saw me and lifted her left hand to make sure I noticed the ring, 3 carats of cubic zirconia that she believed was diamond. I knew it was not. Hector's report had been thorough. At 7:30, the main doors opened again. My father walked in. William Sterling, 6'2", silver-haired, wearing a charcoal suit that was tailored in London and cost more than every outfit in that ballroom combined. Behind him came Catherine Park and her associate Hector, carrying a leather document case, and two men in dark suits with federal badges clipped to their belts. The string quartet stumbled mid-measure. Conversations collapsed. 300 pairs of eyes turned toward the door. Arthur did not recognize my father. He had never met him. He had never once in 25 years asked me about my family, because a woman he considered beneath him could not possibly have a family worth knowing. I walked to the front of the room. I did not raise my voice. The room was already silent enough. "I want to thank Arthur and Rebecca for the invitation tonight," I said. "It gives me the chance to share something with everyone here." I opened the folder, Layer 1. I held up two documents side by side, my authenticated signature from 15 years of tax filings and the forged signature on the mortgage application. This is my handwriting, and this is the forgery that Arthur Whitfield used to extract $400,000 from our family home without my knowledge or consent. The FBI has verified the forgery. Under federal law, this is a felony. Arthur's champagne glass tilted. A thin line of liquid ran down the crystal and pooled on the white tablecloth in a spreading stain he did not seem to notice. His face cycled through expressions: confusion, annoyance, denial, recognition, and then something I had never seen on him before: raw, uncut fear. His jaw worked, but no words came. Rebecca's fingers dug into his sleeve. She still did not grasp the scale of what was happening. A woman at the nearest table, one of Arthur's business partners, someone who had shaken his hand at a dozen networking events, slowly set down her fork and pushed her chair back from the table. Layer 2. My father stepped forward. His voice carried across the ballroom the way a church bell carries across a quiet town, calm, deep, impossible to pretend you did not hear. "My name is William Sterling. I am Emma's father. I am the chairman of Sterling Industries." He let the name settle. It landed differently on different faces. Some recognized it from buildings, from endowments, from the business pages of the Tribune. As of last Friday, he continued, Sterling Industries acquired the full $15 million debt portfolio held against Brennan Home Furnishings, the 5 showroom locations owned by Rebecca's father, Gerald Brennan. Those properties are now in default. Foreclosure proceedings begin Monday. He placed a second folder on the table in front of Rebecca. The Brennan family does not own half of Illinois. They owe half of it. The room rippled. 300 guests turned to look at Rebecca, the way an audience turns when the scenery falls over on stage. Rebecca stared at the folder. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were foreclosure filings, bank statements, and a letter of demand for immediate repayment. Her lower lip trembled. The tiara slipped sideways on her head, and she did not fix it. She turned to Arthur with an expression I will never forget, the exact expression of a woman realizing she has been conned by the same kind of lie she was telling. "You told me you were self-made," she whispered. "You told me you had a portfolio. You said the house was yours, free and clear." Arthur's mouth opened and closed. No sound. Rebecca's voice climbed. "You are broke. You are a criminal. You are going to prison." She struck him across the face. The sound cracked through the ballroom like a starting pistol. Arthur stumbled backward into the champagne display. Crystal shattered across the marble floor, sending shards spinning under tables, and a wave of golden liquid splashed across 3 guests who scrambled out of their chairs. Rebecca screamed, calling him a liar, a thief, a con artist, a nobody who had stolen her best years. Arthur recovered enough to shout back, calling her a gold digger whose family was worth less than the food on these tables. They stood 3 feet apart in a ballroom full of witnesses, tearing each other's lies apart like 2 people pulling at opposite ends of a cheap fabric until it came apart in both their hands. A woman near the back of the room gasped. A man at the bar set down his glass very carefully, as if any sudden movement might make the chaos worse. The string quartet had abandoned their instruments entirely. One of the violinists was holding her phone up recording. Margaret rose from the head table. Her silk napkin fell from her lap to the floor, and she did not notice. Her face had gone the color of cold ash, and her hands the same hands that had spent 25 years gesturing dismissively at my cooking my furniture, my existence, were trembling. She looked at my father, this silver-haired man who had just disassembled her son's world with the calm efficiency of someone closing an unprofitable division, and her voice cracked on the first syllable. Who are you? Who are you people? This is my son's engagement party. You have no right to— William Sterling regarded her. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. I am Emma's father, he said. I am the man whose daughter you spent 25 years calling a bookkeeper and a nobody. And I am the current legal owner of every dollar of debt that your son and his associates have accumulated in the process of destroying my daughter's life. Margaret sat back down. She sat down hard, as if someone had pulled the chair out from under the person she thought she was. The two FBI agents moved through the stunned crowd. One of them, a tall woman with a calm, practiced voice, placed a hand on Arthur's shoulder and spoke the words that turned the evening from spectacle into federal record. Arthur Whitfield, you are under arrest on a federal warrant for mortgage fraud and wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent. The handcuffs made a small, precise sound as they closed, almost delicate, like a clasp on a jewelry box. That click cut through the silence of the abandoned string quartet and the sharp intakes of breath and the rain that had started again outside, tapping against the ballroom windows, as if the sky remembered exactly where this story began. Arthur's business partners stood frozen at their tables. One woman was crying. A man near the bar pulled out his phone and began recording. Margaret gripped the edge of the head table with both hands, her knuckles white, her silk dress suddenly looking like a costume from a play that had just been canceled. Arthur looked at me as the agents guided him toward the door. His eyes were wet and wide. His lips moved, but I could not hear what he said over the noise, and I did not need to. I had spent 25 years listening to that mouth, and none of it had been true. I turned and walked toward the exit. My heels clicked against the marble floor, steady measured, unhurried. Martha fell in beside me. Behind us, the room was still coming apart. Ahead of us, the lobby was empty quiet and lit by a single brass chandelier that turned the floor into something that looked like still water. We stepped outside. The rain had softened to a cold mist. Martha looked at me and asked, "How do you feel?" I considered the question the way I'd been trained to consider every number before signing off on a final audit. "Tired," I said, "and hungry. Is that Greek place on Wabash still open?" The weeks after the party moved, the way debris settles, after an explosion slowly, and in directions you cannot always predict. Gerald Brennan's 5 showrooms were formally seized under the debt acquisition. Rebecca filed for personal bankruptcy. Chapter 7, Total Liquidation. Within a month, she was working as a cashier at a retail store on the South Side, scanning barcodes with the same hands that had once called my oak table cheap. I did not follow her story closely. Martha mentioned it once. I listened the way you listen to a weather report for a city you have already left. Arthur's case moved through the federal court system in the Northern District of Illinois. His court-appointed attorney argued diminished responsibility pressure from peers, a midlife crisis, Rebecca's influence. Catherine Park's team presented my forensic work 14 months of calculated fraud, multiple forged documents, electronic wire transfers, structured to avoid detection. The judge was thorough and unimpressed by the midlife defense. Under the sentencing guidelines, Arthur was looking at 3 to 5 years plus full restitution. The gavel came down without drama. Justice, when it finally arrives, rarely looks the way it does on television. It looks like paperwork. It sounds like a door closing. Margaret appeared at the Sterling Tower lobby on a gray Wednesday morning. Security phoned my father's floor. She stood on the marble in a thin coat, clutching her handbag, asking to see Emma. She wanted to beg me to intervene to call the prosecutors to soften the sentence. She said Arthur was her only son. She said he was not evil, just foolish. The security team explained politely that federal charges are not filed by private citizens and cannot be withdrawn by them. Margaret stood in that lobby for 11 minutes. I watched from the window on the 60th floor. I did not feel satisfaction. I did not feel pity. I felt the specific leaden exhaustion of a woman who had carried someone else's contempt for a quarter century and was finally setting it down. The mediation for our civil divorce was held in a conference room with beige walls and fluorescent lights. Arthur sat across from me in a suit that no longer fit his frame. He had lost weight, and his eyes had the hollowed look of a man who had not slept properly in a month. His attorney had advised full cooperation. Under the Illinois Marriage and Dissolution of Marriage Act, marital assets are divided equitably, but Arthur's criminal fraud had obliterated any legitimate claim to the home equity. He was leaving with nothing. He owed restitution he could not pay. He cried. Quietly at first, then openly, with the kind of heaving sobs I had never once seen from him in 25 years. He said he was sorry. He said the pressure of keeping up appearances had consumed him. He said he still loved me. He said society had made him greedy. I sat with my hands folded on the table and let him finish. Every word. Then I spoke. You did not break because of pressure, Arthur. You broke because you decided that stealing someone else's work was easier than doing your own. That was a choice. You made it every morning when you kissed my forehead and walked out the door to spend my equity on another woman. Every single morning. For 14 months, that is not weakness. That is arithmetic. He reached across the table. His hand hovered in the air, trembling, open, waiting for something I was not going to give. I looked at that hand. The hand that had signed our marriage license. The hand that had held Olivia in the delivery room. The hand that had forged my name on a federal document. I extended my own hand and shook his once firm, brief professional. The way you close a deal, you never intend to revisit. Then I stood, collected my folder, and walked out. The conference room door swung shut behind me, with a sound like the final page of a chapter turning. That evening my phone rang. The screen said, Olivia. My daughter had been at Northwestern through most of the collapse. Arthur had spent years shaping her worldview, telling her I was the boring parent, the one who clipped coupons and watched public television while he talked about ambition and vision and the bigger life they both deserved. Margaret had reinforced the message at every holiday, buying Olivia the things I could not afford, and letting the contrast speak for itself. At 22, Olivia was still young enough to mistake charisma for character. When the engagement to Rebecca was announced, she had sided with her father. She told me I was being dramatic. She said Arthur just wanted to be happy. She stopped returning my calls for 3 weeks after the arrest. Now she was calling. The line was silent for 5 full seconds after I answered. I could hear her breathing quick, shallow, the breathing of someone trying not to cry. Then her voice came through smaller than I had ever heard it, smaller than the day she was 7, and admitted she had broken my favorite coffee mug. Mom, I am so sorry. I did not know. I should have listened. I should have believed you. I am so sorry. I sat down on the kitchen floor of the apartment I had been renting since the storm night. Not because my legs gave out, because some kinds of relief are too large to receive standing up. This was the second time in this story that I ended up on a floor. The first time was a gas station parking lot drowning. This time was a kitchen being pulled to shore by 3 words from my daughter. I did not tell her it was okay, because it was not okay, not yet. What I said was, come home this weekend. We have a lot of catching up to do. She came. We sat at my small kitchen table, a table I had bought for $60 at a thrift store. Nothing like the oak table in the old house, but it was mine, and talked until 2 in the morning. She cried more than I did. That seemed right. She had more to dismantle. Not just the fraud and the arrest, but the slow, painful realization that the father she had admired was a performance a character played with stolen money and borrowed bravado. She told me about the things Arthur had said to her over the years, that I was small-minded, that I held him back, that if it were not for me, he would have been somebody. She had believed him. She had believed every word, because he was her father, and fathers are supposed to tell the truth. When the truth finally arrived in the form of a federal indictment, it did not just change how she saw Arthur. It changed how she saw herself. I said those things to you, Mom, she whispered. I repeated his words. I was his echo. I held her the way I had held her when she was 7 and afraid of thunder. Some things do not change no matter how tall your daughter grows or how many years you have been apart. 6 months later, I was living in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 30th floor of a building in Lincoln Park. I bought it with savings, not sterling money, but the money I had accumulated across 25 years of quiet, meticulous, unrecognized accounting work. Every dollar in that down payment was mine. I chose the paint colors myself: warm gray for the living room, navy blue for the bedroom, deep ocean dark blue, the color Arthur had always rejected as too heavy and impractical for resale. I painted 3 coats. On the third coat, I stepped back and looked at the wall and realized it was the first surface in my home in 25 years that existed solely because I wanted it to. Mornings were different now. I woke when my body decided to wake, not when someone else's alarm demanded it. Made coffee black, no cream, no sugar. It turned out I had been sweetening my coffee for a quarter century because Arthur liked it that way. Black coffee tasted like clarity, like starting over with nothing in the cup except what belonged there. I drank it standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city come alive below me, and I discovered something I should have known decades ago. I was not a morning person. I was a night person. My mind sharpened at 11 p.m. Ideas came faster, words flowed easier. The world made more sense when it was quiet and dark. For 25 years, I had turned off the lights at 10 because Arthur needed early bedtime, and I had assumed my rhythm matched his. It never did. I had just never been given the silence to find out. There were other discoveries, small ones arriving like letters I had mailed to myself long ago and forgotten about. I liked jazz. Not the smooth background kind, the sharp, unpolished recordings from the 1960s that Arthur used to turn off because they gave him a headache. I liked walking at night, the lakefront path after dark when the joggers were gone and the only company was the sound of water and the distant glow of the skyline. I liked cooking without a plan, opening the refrigerator, pulling out whatever looked interesting, making something that had no recipe and no obligation attached. One Saturday night, I made a pasta with nothing but olive oil, garlic, red pepper flakes, and a handful of arugula from the farmer's market. It was the best meal I had eaten in years. Not because the ingredients were special, because no one told me to make it, no one critiqued it, and no one expected it on the table at 6 o'clock sharp. Not every night was easy. Sometimes I woke at 3 in the morning and reached for the right side of the bed. Habit. A quarter century of habit does not dissolve in 6 months. My hand would find cold sheets, and for a breath, the absence would press against my ribs, not missing Arthur exactly, but missing the shape of a life I had memorized so thoroughly that my body still expected it to be there. Those nights I would lie in my navy blue room and listen to the city hum and remind myself that the ache was not weakness. It was the bruise left by something heavy that had finally been lifted. By morning, the feeling would pass, and the coffee would be black, and the sun would come through the east windows of the apartment I had chosen, and the day would belong to me. Martha and I launched the Sterling Legal Aid Foundation that spring. I used a portion of my family trust, not all of it. Not without strict conditions. I wrote myself to fund a team of attorneys specializing in financial abuse within marriage. Forensic accountants, victim advocates, a hotline that operated 18 hours a day. Martha ran daily operations with the precision of the risk analyst she was. I built the financial architecture because if 25 years of household budgeting had taught me anything, it was how to make every dollar fight above its weight class. Our office occupied the 12th floor of a building on Michigan Avenue, and every morning the sun came through the east windows and filled the room with the kind of light that makes you believe new things are possible. The first woman who walked through our door was 58 years old. Her name was Diane. Her husband of 30 years had been siphoning their retirement accounts into a hidden brokerage fund she never knew about. She sat in the chair across from my desk with her hands knotted together and her eyes fixed on the carpet, and I recognized her, not her face, but her posture. The posture of a woman who has just discovered that the ground she was standing on was never solid. I reached across the desk and took her hands. "Do not be afraid," I said. "We are going to trace every dollar, and we are going to get it back." Olivia came to visit on weekends when her schedule allowed. We were learning each other again, not as mother and obedient child, but as two women navigating what was left after the scaffolding fell away. She asked hard questions. I gave honest answers. Some conversations ended in long silences. Some ended in unexpected laughter. All of them ended with the quiet understanding that we were building something new, and new things take time and patience and the willingness to sit with imperfection. On a Friday afternoon in late spring, I was walking through downtown after a meeting with a new donor for the foundation. The sidewalks were thick with the lunch crowd, office workers, tourist delivery drivers threading through the crosswalks. I stopped at a light on State Street and waited. That is when I saw him. Arthur was on the far side of the median, wearing an orange jumpsuit from the Federal Correctional Facility. He was part of a community service crew, 6 men in orange collecting litter along the curb, with long-handled grabbers and clear plastic bags. His hair had gone fully gray. His face was narrower. The shoulders that had once carried a rented tuxedo and the confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable were now bent slightly forward, as if they had learned what gravity really means. He looked up. Our eyes met across 4 lanes of traffic and 25 years of rubble. His mouth opened. Something passed behind his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Shame. The faint muscle memory of an apology he would never get the chance to deliver. He may have said my name. I could not tell over the sound of the buses. I did not stop. I did not smile or frown or wave or look away dramatically. I felt nothing. A complete still nothing, the way you feel passing a restaurant you used to eat at that closed years ago. You remember it existed. You do not miss it. I turned my attention back to the crosswalk signal, thought about whether to make pasta or salmon for dinner with Martha that evening, and walked on. Arthur disappeared into the crowd behind me. I did not think about him again until I mentioned it to Martha over wine that night, and by the time I finished the sentence, I had already forgotten most of the details. That evening, back at the foundation office, I sat at my desk as the last sunlight dropped behind the skyline and turned the city gold, then amber, then deep blue. A single document waited on the desk in front of me, the first major disbursement authorization from the Sterling Legal Aid Foundation, $1 million. Funding for 6 regional offices, 14 attorneys, 3 forensic accountants, and a crisis line that would operate around the clock. I picked up my pen. The nib touched the paper and made a sound, soft, clean, deliberate, not the cold scratch of a divorce petition forced across a kitchen table in a thunderstorm. Not the desperate scrape of a forged name on a stolen document. Just a woman writing her own signature on her own terms, for her own reasons, in a room she had chosen at a desk she had earned. Outside the window, Chicago sparkled. Somewhere in the city, a woman was sitting in a dark room staring at a bank statement that did not make sense, telling herself it was probably nothing. Somewhere another woman was packing a single bag. Somewhere a daughter was reaching for her phone. The pen moved across the paper. The sound was quiet. The sound was mine. If this story stayed with you, I would love to hear about it. Leave a comment and tell me what you felt. Every voice in this community matters. If you have not already, please tap the like button and subscribe to the channel. And if you know a woman who needs to hear this story, share it with her. Sometimes the right words at the right time can change everything. Thank you for staying until the very end. That means more than you know.